So, in the heart of Rome, there's this famous museum that basically decided to just tear up the rulebook. We're going to take a look at the National Gallery of Modern and Contemporary Art to see what happens when you throw out the timeline and completely rethink how we're supposed to experience art.
And this right here is the core idea, laid out by the museum's director, Cristiana Collò. The key word that jumps out is anarchy. But listen to what she says next, which has nothing to do with disorder. So this isn't about chaos. It's about a system that just operates on totally different rules. It's a very deliberate step away from that straight A to B to C timeline of art history that, we've all been taught to expect. So yeah, that's really the big question for us today. What does it actually look and feel like when a huge institution with over a century of history decides that time, as we know it, isn't the best way to tell a story anymore?
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the radical exhibition that kicked this whole thing off. Then we'll peel back the building's own hidden history to see why this change was so needed. After that, we'll dig into the museum's new philosophy of care, see how it sparks these incredible new conversations between the artworks, and finally, we'll ask the big one, what does this all mean for the future of museums everywhere? So the whole revolution began with this one exhibition, and the title says it all. Time is out of joint. I mean, that name alone is a declaration, right? It's a signal that the old straight-line way of seeing things was about to get completely turned on its head. And here's the crucial part. Instead of walking neatly from the 19th century into the 20th, you might suddenly find a classical sculpture in a silent standoff with a piece of post-war conceptual art. The whole point is to spark connections based on themes or feelings or big ideas, not just what year they were made. But to really get why this was so revolutionary, you have to look at the building itself. You see, this new vision could never have happened until the director first dealt with a space that was, well, literally being crushed by its own complicated past. As you can see from this timeline, the building was never some static monument. It was constantly being tinkered with. From its grand opening, through decades of renovations and add-ons, all the way to this wild story in 1988, where they finish a brand new wing and it's immediately declared unsafe and totally unusable. The building had become this confusing architectural Frankenstein. And all those little changes over the years, they added up. The original architect's vision was just buried. The pathways made no sense, beautiful details had been stripped out. The whole place felt like a messy patchwork instead of a single, coherent building. And that feeling started at the front door, which felt more like a fortress than an invitation. It was a building at war with itself.
Okay, so that brings us to the solution. The new director, Cristiana Collò, didn't just want to rehang the paintings. She started with the building itself. And her approach was this philosophy she calls care, which began with what was basically a conceptual excavation.
This quote just perfectly captures her approach. It wasn't about adding new stuff, it was about taking things away. She describes the work like an archaeological dig, peeling back all those layers of fixes and changes to find what she called the primal configuration, the building's original soul. It was really about letting the architecture finally take a deep breath. And wow, this chart really shows you the dramatic shift in thinking. The museum went from a place where the very first thing you do is buy a ticket to a space that welcomes you before asking for a single euro. Those simple, hard benches, they were replaced with designer furniture, encouraging you to actually sit and think, not just rest your feet. The museum was no longer just a place to pass through. It became a place you could actually live in for a while. So, with this revitalized space, the stage was finally set to let the art itself break free from the timeline. And this, my friends, is where the real anarchy begins. Okay, check this out. It's a perfect example. In one room, you can see Claude Monet's iconic pink water lilies from 1898, hanging right near Michelangelo Pistoletto's mirrored piece, The Visitors, from 1968. I mean, they're 70 years apart, but when you put them together, they create this whole new conversation about reflection, about perception, and about your role as the viewer. You're not just looking at Impressionism anymore, you're suddenly thinking about how art sees you. And this new freedom isn't just about creating cool aesthetic moments. It has a much deeper purpose. By breaking that old, rigid canon, the museum can finally start to address some of its historical blind spots. For instance, they can now place works by lesser-known women artists in direct conversation with their famous male contemporaries, which totally challenges the old hierarchies. The museum is using its new voice to explore complex modern issues, and that makes it feel more alive and more relevant than ever.
Ultimately, this whole incredible project in Rome pushes us to ask a much, much bigger question about what a museum is even supposed to be in the modern world.
The fundamental shift is really this. It's a move away from the museum as this silent, sacred temple where you go to passively admire masterpieces from a distance. Instead, it becomes a dynamic forum, a public square for dialogue, for asking questions, and for making your own connections.
And when you boil it all down, this whole experiment leaves us with one central, unavoidable question. Think about it. Is the role of a museum to give you the single, official, chronological story of art? Or is it to provide the tools, the space, and maybe just the spark for you to build your own narrative, to find your own meaning in the beautiful anarchy of it all? That's the question Rome's Rebel Museum is asking all of us.